The air in the lower tiers always had a taste. Jean thought of it as the flavor of rust, old machines, and forgotten things. It was cold, and the dim glow from broken streetlights painted long shadows on the damp walls. He moved through a narrow service alley, his hands feeling along the familiar grooves in the metal. His friend Chul was a few steps behind, his breath making small clouds in the air. "This unit is picked clean, Jean. We're wasting time." "Not yet," Jean said, his voice low. He knelt by a dead public console, its screen dark forever. "The power couplings here. If they're not cracked, we can trade them for a week's food credits." Chul sighed but moved to help. They worked in silence, their tools scraping softly. This was their life, scavenging in the bones of the great city that climbed far above their heads. Up there, in the spires, the air was clean and the lights were bright. Down here, people lived in the drip-drip of leaking pipes and the steady hum of ancient, failing systems. Jin's world was small. It was the network of alleys he knew, the faces of other scavengers, the weight of a useful piece of scrap in his pocket. He did not think about the empire, the Korean sovereignty, or its empty throne. History was for people who had full stomachs. He finally pried the casing open. Inside, the coupling looked intact. A small victory. He allowed himself a thin smile. "See? Patience." Before Chul could answer, a soft whirring sound came from above. A light, clean and white, cut through the gloomy air. Both men froze. A security drone descended. It was a smooth, disc-shaped thing, its surface unmarked by grime. It was from the upper tiers. These drones sometimes came down for what they called vagrancy audits. They scanned, logged, and moved on, almost never taking action. There were too many poor people to bother with. "Don't move," Jean whispered. "Just look down." The drone's beam washed over Chul first. A soft blue light scanned him from head to toe. A single low chime sounded. "No issue." It floated to Jean. The white light felt warm on his skin. Passed over his face, his ragged jacket, his dirty hands. The usual low chime started, then stuttered. The sound changed. It became a sharp, rhythmic trill, loud in the quiet alley. A sound that was not in any scavenger's memory. The drone stopped its movement, hovering directly in front of Jin's face. A light projected from its center. It formed a symbol in the air. A complex, interlocking glyph that glowed with a gentle gold light. Pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Jean had no idea what it meant, but he knew it was bad. This was no ordinary audit. This was a specific flag. A mistake. A terrible system error had just marked him for something. Chul's eyes were wide with panic. "What did you do?" "Nothing," Jean hissed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The drone stayed for 5 more seconds, the glyph pulsing in the air between them. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the glyph vanished. The drone's trill cut off. It rotated sharply and shot upward, disappearing into the darkness above with a speed that was meant for emergencies. The alley was silent again, save for the distant drip of water. "What was that symbol?" Chul asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Jean said, but his body knew it meant danger. Deep, instinctual fear flooded him. Authorities. Arrest. Reprocessing. The upper tiers did not send drones that pulsed golden glyphs for no reason. This was a catastrophe. He shoved the power coupling into his bag, his movements frantic. "We have to go. Now." "Where?" "Jean, it scanned you. It knows your face, your code. It made a mistake," Jean said, more to himself than to Chul. "It has to be a mistake. But they'll come to correct it." He looked down the 2 ends of the alley. The main passages were out. They would be watched. He turned to a rusted grate covering an old ventilation shaft, one of his secret routes. He jammed his tool into the seam and pulled. With a loud shriek of metal, it gave way. "Go home, Chul. Act normal. You didn't see anything." "Jean, go." Chul hesitated, then nodded, running back the way they came. Jean slid into the dark, cold shaft, pulling the grate mostly closed behind him. He was swallowed by the complete blackness, the familiar smell of stale air and decay filling his nose. He began to crawl, moving deeper into the bowels of the city, away from the light, away from the symbol, away from the life he knew. Above, in the gleaming archives of lineage, a quiet terminal on a historian's desk lit up with a priority alert it had not shown in 1,000 years. But down in the rust and the dark, Gene knew only one thing. He was a scavenger who had been seen. And in his world, being seen was the first step toward being erased. The archives of lineage were silent. The only light came from the soft glow of data screens, row after row of them, telling the history of families that no longer existed. Mira sat at her station, her eyes tired. Her job was to watch over ghosts. She was updating a log of minor bureaucratic births from the third spire when her screen flashed. Not a normal flash. A deep, pulsing red border she had only ever seen in training simulations. Priority genomic event. Source: Drone Audit Gamma 77. Match threshold exceeded. She blinked, sure it was a system test. But the verification codes were live. Her fingers, moving almost on their own, opened the alert. The data packet unfolded. A DNA sequence map, pulled from a standard vagrancy scan, filled one side of the screen. On the other side, the system automatically pulled up the oldest, most secured file in the archive, the Royal Genomic Template. 2 lines of swirling code. They spun next to each other. Her screen began to draw bright green connection lines between them, hundreds, then thousands. A percentage ticked upward in the center of the display. 92%. 97%. 99.3%. Myra's breath caught in her throat. She leaned closer, her heart beating a strange rhythm against her ribs. 99.997%. The number froze. Below it, the words flashed. Match confirmed. Direct maternal line. Probability of error, negligible. It's not possible, she whispered to the empty room. The royal line was extinct. It had been extinct since the Great Plague 1,000 years ago. That was the first fact every archive worker learned. The throne was a beautiful, empty piece of history, a symbol. The system prompted her to review the source visual. She tapped the screen. A video file played, captured from the drone's perspective. It showed a dim alley, all grays and browns. The camera focused on a young man in dirty clothes, his face thin, his eyes wide with the fear of someone caught in a security light. He looked like any other destitute soul from the lower tiers. There was no crown, no light of destiny, just a scared scavenger. The system had drawn a faint, glowing box around his face. The same golden glyph from the drone, the seal of the House of Haesong, pulsed softly next to his image. Mira sat back. Her mind raced, trying to find an error. Corrupted file. Clever hack. But the archives were sealed, the most secure system outside of the military core. The drone scan was simple, reliable tech. And the genetic match was too precise, too deep to be fake. This was real. A feeling, long buried under dust and data, stirred in her. It was not excitement, but a heavy, fearful awe. The universe had turned a page everyone thought was glued shut. Protocol was clear. This was not a decision for an archive technician. She had to report it. Her fingers moved again, bringing up the secure comlink list. 2 names glowed with ultimate authority. First, she entered the message for Captain Taysan of the Royal Guard. The words felt strange to type. Per Article Primus of the Succession Protocols, a viable genetic heir to the throne of Haesong has been identified. Location and biometric data attached. Awaiting your command. She sent it. Next, the Chancellor's office. Here, her wording was more careful. Archival systems have registered an unprecedented genomic anomaly. Initial verification suggests a match to the historic royal line. Full data packet for your review. Awaiting verification instructions. She stared at the sent notification on both messages. The silence of the archives now felt different. It was no longer the silence of the past, but the quiet before a storm. She looked back at the young man's face on her screen. His name, pulled from the basic civic registry, was listed simply as Gene. No family name, no notable history, a blank space. What must he be feeling right now? The drone had scanned him and fled. He would be confused. He would be scared. He would probably run. She knew the lower tiers were a maze. If he disappeared into the deep slums, even the guard might not find him for a long time. For 1,000 years, her people had lived with an empty center. They had built their lives around the absence. The chancellor governed. The guard stood watch over nothing, and she tended to dead records. It was stable. It was quiet. This one face, this destitute human with royal blood in his veins, was a question no one had thought to ask in centuries. And Mira had just sent that question screaming up the chain of command. She closed the visual, but the image of his frightened eyes stayed with her. She was a historian. She knew what happened to people who were suddenly called kings. It was never simple. It was often violent. Her terminal chimed softly. A reply. From the chancellor's office. It was brief. Acknowledge. Commence full data isolation. No external dissemination. Await my personal review. The stability of the sovereignty is paramount. The message from Captain Taysan arrived a moment later. It was even shorter. Acknowledge. Mobilizing. Secure the primary data. We will retrieve him. Mira took a deep breath. It had begun. The past was not dead. It was alive, and it was hiding in the dark, trying to get away. Her job now was to keep the ghost safe in her machine until the soldiers came. She locked down the archive terminal, ensuring only her codes and those of the 2 men she had just alerted could access the discovery. Outside the tall windows of the archive, the spires of the city glittered under a false night sky, unaware that their world had just tilted on its axis. And deep below, a man named Gene was crawling through the dark, unaware that he was no longer just a scavenger. He was now a problem, a miracle, and a key to a door everyone had forgotten. The Royal Guard barracks were the quietest place Captain Taysan had ever known. The halls were polished, the uniforms perfect, and the drills were run with silent precision. For 30 years, his life had been the maintenance of a ghost. He commanded soldiers who guarded empty rooms. He inspected weapons that would never be fired in defense of their monarch. His purpose was a memory that he was in his office, reviewing a duty roster for the next watch over the silent throne room, when the alert chimed on his secure terminal. It was a sound he had never heard before, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He read the message from the archives. He read it 3 times. The words made no sense, and then they made a terrible, wonderful kind of sense. Viable genetic heir. 1,000 years of waiting. 1,000 years of ceremony without a center. It was over. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the attached file. He saw the genetic match statistics, the impossible percentage. He opened the visual. He saw a young man. Thin, dirty, eyes wide with the fear of a trapped animal. This was the face that had just broken history. For a long minute, Taysan simply sat. He felt no joy. He felt a crushing weight. This was not a prince raised in secret, wise and ready. This was a destitute soul from the depths. The reality was messy and frightening. What had they done, waking this ghost? But his oath was not to question. His oath was to act. The protocol was ancient but clear. The heir must be secured. He stood up, his movements automatic. He opened a channel to his second-in-command. "Assemble Alpha Squad," he said, his voice rough. "Full discreet protocol. Non treatening posture. We have a recovery operation." "Recovery, sir?" his second asked, confused. "They retrieved lost documents, not people." "A person," Taysan said. "The most important person. Location data is coming to you now. We move in 10 minutes. He closed the channel and looked at the image of Jean again. The fear in the young man's eyes was the clearest thing in the picture. He would be hiding. He would be running. He was probably more scared of the authorities than of anything else in his hard life. Taysen walked to the armory, but he did not take a heavy weapon. He selected a small, non-lethal stunner. This was not an attack. It was a retrieval. He hoped he could make the heir understand that. Meanwhile, deep in the Undercity, Jean was not running anymore. He was hiding. He had crawled into an old maintenance pod, a tiny metal shell that had once held tools. It was cold and dark, but it was safe. He could hear the distant sounds of the lower tiers. Machinery, voices, the drip of water. Normal sounds. He clutched his bag to his chest. Inside were the power couplings from the console. His last piece of a normal life. He thought about Chul. He hoped his friend had listened and gone home. Why had the drone done that? What was the golden symbol? He had no frame for it. In his world, attention from above meant trouble. It meant fines you couldn't pay, or relocation to a worse district, or conscription into a work crew. The best thing to be was invisible. He heard a new sound. Not the familiar scuttle of rats or the creak of old metal. It was a soft, rhythmic tread. Boots. More than one pair. They moved with a purpose that was alien down here. They were not shuffling or searching clumsily. They were walking with knowing, direct steps. They were coming his way. His blood went cold. He held his breath, making himself small in the dark pod. The footsteps stopped right outside. A beam of pure white light sliced through the cracks in the pod's door, illuminating the dust in the air. Gene. The voice was not loud, but it was firm. It was a man's voice, older, tired. We are not here to hurt you. We are the Royal Guard. Royal Guard? The words meant nothing to Gene. Guards were for the spires, for important people. Please come out, the voice said. There was a long pause. We know you are scared. We have food. And answers. Gene did not move. He felt like a cornered animal. He heard the man sigh softly. My name is Captain Taysan. I have served the throne my whole life. Today, a machine told me my duty is to you. I do not understand it either. But I must ask you to come with me. The honesty in the voice was what did it. It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. This captain was as confused as he was. Slowly, stiffly, Gene pushed the door of the pod open. The white light made him squint. He saw 3 figures in sleek gray armor, standing in a loose circle. The one in front had removed his helmet. He had a weary, serious face. He looked at Gene not with disgust or anger, but with a kind of sad wonder. This was Captain Taysan. He looked at the scavenger, the destitute human covered in grime, and he saw the reason for his life's work. The sight filled him not with pride, but with a profound and aching sorrow. Gene climbed out, his legs shaky. He kept his bag. He saw the stunner on Taysan's belt, but the man's hands were open and empty. The answers? Gene whispered, his throat dry. What are they? I do not have them all, Taysan said truthfully. Only the first one. A machine says your blood is royal. The rest, we must find out together. He gestured gently. Will you come? I give you my word, you will be safe. Gene looked at the tall, armored men. He looked back into the dark maze of the Undercity. There were no good choices, only unknown paths. He gave one small, numb nod. Taysan did not smile. He simply turned and led the way, his guards falling in around Gene, not as captors, but as a shield. They walked him out of the rust and into the light of the upper tiers, toward a destiny that felt, to both the captain and the scavenger, like a terrifying mistake. The upper tiers did not have rust. Gene noticed that first. The air here smelled of clean filters and recycled water. The walls were smooth and white. He sat on a narrow cot in a quiet room inside the Royal Guard barracks. It was not a cell. The door was not locked, but he felt trapped all the same. 2 guards stood outside in the hallway. They did not look at him with anger, only a strange, stiff formality. He had been brought here without explanation. They had given him clean, simple clothes. They had given him food, real food, not paste. He ate it slowly, suspiciously. Captain Taysan entered the room. He was not wearing a helmet. His face was serious, with lines of worry around his eyes. He carried no weapon. You will come with me, Taysan said. His voice was not unkind. There is a final test. What test? Gene asked. His voice sounded rough in the quiet room. A confirmation, Taysan said. He did not explain more. He simply turned and walked out, expecting Gene to follow. Gene did. The 2 guards fell into step behind him. They walked through clean, empty hallways. The building was huge and silent. Jean saw no other people. He thought of the lower tiers, always full of noise and life and struggle. This place felt dead. They entered a different kind of room. It was full of machines and screens. A woman stood waiting by a central console. She looked at him as he entered. Her eyes were intelligent and full of a deep curiosity. She was not a soldier. She wore simple gray clothes. "This is Mira," Captain Taysan said. "She is an archivist. She will administer the scan." Mira gave a small, polite nod. "It will not hurt," she said. Her voice was calm, professional. "It is just a more detailed version of what the drone did." Jean looked at the machine. It was a chair with a clear hood above it. He felt a cold fear. "Why?" he asked again. "Why me?" Taysan and Mira shared a quick look. It was Taysan who answered. "Because the machine says you are someone very important. We must be sure the machine is not wrong." "I'm no one," Jean said, the words coming out with the force of truth. "Please," Mira said, gesturing to the chair. "The faster we do this, the faster we will have answers." Jean sat. The chair was soft. Mira lowered the clear hood. A soft blue light washed over him from all sides. He could hear a gentle hum. He closed his eyes, not wanting to see. He thought of Chul, probably searching for him in the lower tiers. He thought of his hidden stash of spare parts. A normal life, now impossibly far away. On her screen, Mira watched the data flow. The deep sequence analysis was undeniable. It was not just a match. It was a perfect echo. The genetic signature of the last ruling family, preserved in this tired young man from the dark. She had studied the history of the Haesong line their entire career. She knew their portraits, their decrees, their stories. Seeing their code alive in the scanner felt like seeing a ghost step into the room. Captain Taysan watched Jin's face. He saw the tension, the fear, the confusion. This was not a king. This was a lost boy. For 30 years, Taysan had trained to protect a throne. He had polished empty armor. He had recited oaths to a chair. His entire life's purpose had been a beautiful fiction. Now, the fiction had become flesh, and it was scared. A deep, unexpected sorrow settled in his chest. What had they done? A chime sounded. The scan was complete. The hood lifted. Mira stared at her screen. The result was final. Confirmed. Royal House of Haesong. Heir designate. She took a slow breath and looked at Captain Taysan. She gave a single, small nod. Taysan's shoulders stiffened. The moment was historic. It was the moment he had been born for. But it felt like a tragedy. He walked to the chair. Jean stood up, looking between the soldier's grave face and the archivist's solemn one. "Well?" Jean asked. "Am I in trouble?" Taysan did not smile. He slowly went down on one knee. He bowed his head. It was the ancient gesture of fealty, unseen for a millennium. "Your blood is confirmed," Taysan said, his voice thick with an emotion he did not understand. "By the ancient laws of the sovereignty, you are the heir." The words meant nothing to Jean. Heir to what? An empty room? A silent building? He took a step back from the kneeling man. "Stop that," he said. "Please, get up." Taysan stood. He looked helpless. "What does that mean?" Jean asked, looking at Mira. "What does it actually mean?" Mira opened her mouth to explain about history, about the throne, about destiny. But the words died on her lips. She saw only a man who needed the truth. "It means," she said carefully, "that a very old system says you are in charge. A system no one alive has ever used." In a secure room high above, the Chancellor watched the feed from the scanner room on his own screen. He saw the confirmation. He saw Taysan kneel. His face, usually calm and controlled, was hard that he had hoped for a mistake. He had hoped for a fraud. But this was real. A destitute scavenger was now, legally, the single most important person in the Empire. It was chaos. It was a joke that could destroy everything. He leaned forward and spoke into his communicator, his voice low and urgent. "Captain, Archivist, bring him to the private council chamber. Now, we must discuss the path forward." He paused. "And ensure he is presentable." The words presentable hung in the air. In the scanner room, Tae-san heard the order. He looked at Jin's short, rough hair and his ordinary clothes. Come, Tae-san said to Jin, his voice returning to that of a soldier following orders. We must go to another room. The Chancellor wishes to speak with you. Jin felt a new kind of fear, not of machines or soldiers but of words and plans. He was a piece in a game he did not know how to play. He had no choice. He followed them out of the room, leaving the proof of his blood glowing on Myra's screen. A truth that felt more like a prison sentence with every step. The room was not a cell, but Jin felt the walls anyway. It was a small suite in the Royal Guard barracks. There was a bed, a chair, a table, and a small washing area. The door had no lock, but a guard was always outside. The window looked out on a blank interior courtyard. It was the nicest place Jin had ever slept, and it felt like a cage. For 2 days, nothing happened. Food arrived on a tray. The guard changed. Captain Tae-san visited once, standing stiffly in the doorway, asking if he needed anything. Jin asked for news of the lower tiers of his friend Chul. Tae-san had no answer. He left looking more troubled than when he arrived. On the third morning, Mira arrived. She carried a small data pad and her calm, serious expression. Captain Tae-san and the Chancellor have asked me to help you, she said. To provide context. Context for what? Jin asked. He remained sitting on the bed. For your situation, Mira said. She pulled the chair from the table and sat, keeping a respectful distance. For the history you are now a part of. I'm not part of any history, Jin said, looking at the floor. There's been a mistake. Mira ignored this. She opened her data pad. A hologram flickered to life above it. It showed a symbol, the same golden glyph from the drone. This is the seal of the House of Haesong. 1,000 years ago, they ruled the sovereignty. They built the first city spires. They established the laws we still use. The image changed to show a figure in ornate robes. The last ruling monarch was Queen Hyen. She died without an heir during the Great Plague. The sickness took most of the royal family and millions of others. After that, the Chancellor's office took over governance. The throne, she said, the image shifting to show an empty, beautiful chair in a vast hall, has been empty since, a symbol of what we lost. Jin listened. He watched the images. They were like children's stories. They had nothing to do with leaking pipes, with bartering for old parts, with the taste of nutrient paste. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because the scanners say you are a direct descendant of Queen Hyen's bloodline, Mira said softly. They say you are the heir. Jin shook his head. My parents were nobody. They worked in a recycling plant. They got sick and died. That's all. Genetics can sleep for generations, Mira said. They can hide. Your parents, their parents, they likely never knew. The blood was there, waiting. Waiting for what? Jin's voice rose. To be pulled from an alley? To be stuck in this room? Mira was quiet for a moment. She switched off the hologram. What do you want to know? She asked, changing her approach. Jin looked at her. Here was someone who seemed to deal in truth. The lower tiers, he said. The water processors in the old sector. Did they ever get fixed? There was a plan years ago. A promise. Mira blinked. This was not a question about ceremony or law. She tapped on her data pad, searching public works records. She read for a minute. The plan was archived. Deferred due to resource allocation. Deferred. Jin repeated, a hollow laugh in his throat. That means no. The pipes still leak. The filters are clogged. People get sick from the water. He leaned forward. Can your history fix that? Mira met his eyes. No, she said honestly. History only says what happened. It doesn't fix pipes. Then what use is it? Jin asked. He wasn't being rude. He truly wanted to know. Helps us understand, Mira said, but the words felt weak even to her. Jin told her about the lower tiers then, not with anger, but with simple facts. He described the maze of alleys, the community of scavengers who shared food, the way you could tell a safe corridor from a dangerous one by the smell of the air. He talked about Chul, who could make broken machines sing again. He talked about the constant, quiet work of keeping a broken world from falling completely apart. Mira listened. She did not take notes. She heard the history he was describing, a living history written in rust and repair and shared meals. It was more real than any archive. Later, when Mira had reports to file, Captain Taysan took over the watch. He stood by the window, looking out at nothing. "Do you have a family?" Jean asked him. Taysan seemed surprised by the question. "I have the guard," he said finally. "But before that, a long time ago," Taysan said. "He did not offer more." "My friend Chul," Jean said. "He'll think I'm dead or arrested. He might do something stupid trying to find me." Taysan turned from the window. "I can have a guard check, discreetly, to say you are alive and safe. Would you?" Jean asked. The hope in his voice was painful to hear. Taysan nodded, a sharp, military motion. "I will see to it." That small act of kindness changed the room. Jean was not a symbol to Taysan in that moment. He was a young man worried about his friend. It was a feeling the captain understood. When Mira returned the next day, their talk was easier. She asked more about the lower tiers. He asked about how the upper tiers really worked, about the chancellor. She was careful, but she told him truths. That the government was slow, that it cared most for stability, that the grand projects often never reached the depths below. Jean began to understand his cage. It was not just the room. It was an idea. The idea of a king. They wanted to put him inside that idea like a piece of ancient art in a display case. He could see the shape of it now. They would clean him up, parade him quietly, and put him somewhere he couldn't touch anything real. He looked at Mira, who knew everything about the past but couldn't fix a water pipe. He looked at the door, where Taysan stood guard, a man who had spent his life protecting a ghost. He was beginning to see the outlines of the machine he had been thrown into, and he knew, deep in his scavenger's bones, that machines could be taken apart. Even big, old, powerful ones. You just had to find the right tool. The silence in the private council chamber was thick and heavy. It was a small, circular room with a dark table. Screens were set into the walls, showing peaceful scenes of gardens that no longer existed. Jean sat in the simple chair they had given him. Captain Taysan stood behind him, a statue in uniform. Mira sat to the side, her data pad in her lap. The Chancellor sat across from them. He was an old man with a calm face and careful eyes. He did not look angry or happy. He looked like a man solving a difficult problem. "The confirmation is absolute," the Chancellor said, his voice smooth. "We are faced with a historical miracle." He looked at Jean, but spoke about him as if he were not there. "The return of the Haesong line." Jean said nothing. He just watched. "However," the Chancellor continued, "we must be practical. The sovereignty has been without a monarch for 1,000 years. Our systems function. Our people have peace. To drop a king, especially one from an unexpected background, into the center of this delicate machine could cause panic, could break things." Mira looked down at her hands. Taysan's posture became even more rigid. "The rival empires," the Chancellor said, turning to a screen that showed star maps. "They would see this as a moment of weakness, a joke, a scavenger king. They would mock us and then they might test us." He turned back to them, his hands folded on the table. "Therefore, I propose a solution that honors tradition and protects stability. We will formally recognize Jean as the true heir. We will give him the title. We will place him in the royal apartments, with all the honor he is due." Jean felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew what was coming. "His role," the Chancellor said gently, "will be ceremonial, symbolic. He will be a living bridge to our glorious past. He will appear at certain memorials. He will be a face on the history screens. In this way, we satisfy the ancient law. We honor the bloodline, but the actual work of governance, the difficult daily decisions, will remain with this office, as it has for centuries." It is the only way to avoid chaos. He smiled. It was a reasonable smile. It is a great honor, Jean. A life of comfort and respect. Far from the difficulties of your previous life. The room waited. The Chancellor looked at Taysan. Captain, your duty has always been to protect the crown. Now you can fulfill it. You will guard his person. You will ensure his safety and his dignified presence. He looked at Mira. Archivist, your duty is to preserve the truth. You will become his tutor. You will help him understand the symbolic weight he carries. You will prepare him for his public role. He had given them both what they wanted, in a way. A king to guard. A history to teach. But he had hollowed it out. He had made Jean into a painting on a wall. The Chancellor looked at Jean, expecting gratitude. Expecting relief. Jin's heart was pounding. But his mind was clear. This was the deal. This was the cage they had built. A gilded hole to sit in quietly. Forever. He thought of the Chancellor's words. The actual work of governance, he remembered the words of a lower-tier mechanic he'd known. If you want to know who's really in charge, don't look at the person talking. Look at where the tools and the food are going. Jean took a slow breath. He did not look at the Chancellor. He looked at the smooth, blank wall behind him. And he began to understand his tool. It was not strength. It was not knowledge of history. It was the truth of the lower tiers. It was the one thing they had all forgotten. He kept quiet. He simply nodded, a small, slow motion. The Chancellor's smile became more genuine. Good. I see you are wise. We will begin the preparations. Quiet announcement. A slow introduction to the public. The meeting ended. Taysan escorted Jean back to his room. The captain's face was hard, his jaw tight. He said nothing until they reached the door. I took an oath, Taysan said suddenly, his voice low, to protect and serve the sovereign. Not a symbol. The person. The oath says nothing about making him a museum piece. He looked ashamed, as if confessing a crime. Mira joined them a little later. She brought no datapad. Her eyes were sad. I study truth, she said. But that room, that was about hiding truth in plain sight. I am sorry. Jean looked at them. The soldier bound by honor. The historian bound by truth. They were trapped too, by the Chancellor's reasonable, practical plan. The vents in this room, Jean said quietly, not looking at them. They're old. The design is pre-plague. I recognized it when I came in. He finally met their eyes. The sound carries from the council chamber. I heard everything you discussed before we went in. Myra's hand went to her mouth. Taysan stared. He doesn't want a king, Jean said. He wants a doll he can dress up. He's scared of what might change. He paused. Are you scared? The question hung in the air. Taysan and Mira looked at each other. They saw their own disappointment, their own unease, mirrored in the other's face. I am scared of failing my duty, Taysan said finally. I am scared of burying history, Mira said. Jean nodded. I am scared of a life where I can't help my friend Chul, where I can't even ask about a broken water pipe. He stood up. He said my role would be symbolic. What is a symbol? He didn't wait for an answer. A symbol is a tool. It makes people think. It makes them feel. It makes them act. He looked at both of them. He wants to make me a symbol of the past, quiet and dead. What if I choose to be a different kind of symbol? For the first time, Jean did not look lost or scared. He looked like a scavenger who had found a valuable, dangerous piece of tech and was figuring out how it worked. He had seen the machine. He had heard its plan. And in the quiet of his room, with a soldier and a historian as his only allies, he began to form his own. The throne room was not what Jean expected. It was not a grand hall filled with people. It was a smaller, private chamber used for closed councils. The ceiling was high, and at the far end sat the throne itself. It was a beautiful chair of pale stone and woven metal. It sat on a raised platform, empty for 1,000 years. It looked less like a seat of power and more like a tombstone. The Chancellor stood near the center of the room. A few high officials stood with him, their faces curious and cautious. Captain Taysan stood rigidly by the door, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Mira stood off to the side, her data pad held tightly. Jean walked in. He wore the same simple, clean clothes they had given him days ago. He had asked for nothing else. He felt their eyes on him, measuring him, seeing only the dirt of the lower tiers that no wash could clean. The Chancellor began to speak. His voice was warm and filled the room. Today we witness the closing of a circle. 1,000 years of silence is broken. The blood of Haesong has returned to us. He gestured to Jean. We welcome the heir, and in the spirit of continuity and peace, we will integrate this miracle into our stable order. The heir will assume a ceremonial role, a living symbol of our past, as we wisely manage our future. He turned to Jean, expecting him to step forward, to bow his head, to accept the beautiful cage. Jean did not move. He let the Chancellor's words fade into the quiet of the room. He looked not at the Chancellor, but at Captain Taysan. He remembered his promise to check on Chul. He remembered the sorrow in the soldier's eyes when he knelt. Then he looked at Mira. He remembered her honesty about the broken water pipes, her shame after the private meeting. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was clear in the silent room. You say the throne has been empty for 1,000 years. The Chancellor nodded, a polite smile on his face. A great loss. I think it has been empty because you all look up at it, Jean said. He pointed to the stone chair. You look up there at that one seat, and you forget to look down. You forget to look at the seats that are not there. The seats for the people in the lower tiers who have no chairs at all. The Chancellor's smile froze. Poetic, he said. But governance requires fixing things that are broken, Jean interrupted. He wasn't arguing. He was just stating a fact the way he would state that a power coupling was cracked. You want me to be a symbol of the past, a quiet thing in a quiet room. I don't want that. He took a step forward, toward the center of the room, but not toward the throne. He faced Taysan. Captain, your oath, is it to a chair? Or is it to the people of the sovereignty? Taysan's eyes widened. Every official in the room stared at the captain. The question was a trap, a test no one had ever asked him to take. He had sworn to protect the crown. But what was the crown? He looked at Jin's plain clothes, his steady gaze. He looked at the Chancellor's calculating face. The oath, he realized, was not to a thing. It was to an idea of protection. His voice, when it came, was a soldier's voice, strong and sure. My oath is to the people. The crown is their protector. That is its first duty. A murmur went through the officials. Jean turned to Mira. Archivist, the most important history. Is it in your machine? Or is it happening right now in the lower tiers where people are getting sick from bad water? Mira felt her face grow warm. She clutched her data pad. She thought of the deferred public works plans. She thought of Jin's description of life below. She lifted her chin. The most important history is the one we are making. And we are not making it well. Jean now turned to the Chancellor and the others. He spread his hands, empty. I don't know your laws. I don't know your ceremonies. I know broken systems. I know that a symbol that just sits is useless. You say I am the heir. So here is my first request. He used the word carefully. Not a command. A request. It was stronger. I request a mandate. Not to rule. Not to sit on that chair. He pointed again to the throne. I want Captain Taysan and his guards, and Archivist Mira and her records, to help me with one thing. The restoration of the lower-tier water processors in the old sector. Call it the Royal Restoration Project, if you need a name from history. But let the project be about fixing pipes, not polishing crowns. The silence was absolute. The Chancellor was stunned. This was not a challenge for power. It was a sidestep. It was a change of the game itself. The heir did not want the throne. He wanted a toolbox and a work order. How could he argue against it without looking cruel? How could he deny a royal project? He saw the faces of the officials. Some were shocked, but some, especially those from lower-tier districts, looked thoughtful. interested. He saw the resolve on Tayson's face. He saw the light of purpose in Myra's eyes. The Chancellor was a practical man. He saw control slipping away. But he also saw a new kind of stability, a harmless outlet for this inconvenient heir. A project that could keep him busy and away from real power. He forced a smile. It was tight, but it was a smile. Practical first gesture. Connecting the new reign to the needs of the people. It has a certain harmony. He gave a slow nod. It can be arranged. Jean nodded back. He did not smile. He knew this was just a beginning. A single, small crack in the machine. He walked away from the center of the room, away from the throne. He walked to where Taysan and Mira stood. He stopped beside them, turning his back on the empty chair. He looked at a data screen on the wall. One Mira quickly pulled up showing a schematic of the lower-tier water systems. The first junction is here, Jean said, pointing to a blinking fault line on the map. The seals are pre-plague design. We'll need compatible polymer, not the modern stuff. It won't bond right. Captain Taysan looked at the screen, then at Jean. He did not kneel. He simply stood a little taller, his duty suddenly clear and real. I will secure the necessary materials, he said. Mira zoomed in on the schematic. I will find the original engineering specs, she said, her fingers already moving. Together, the three of them looked at the broken map. The throne remained behind them, empty as it had been for 1,000 years. And for the first time, that did not feel like a loss. Felt like space to breathe. Felt like room to finally do some real work.